2009 was a really challenging year on the farm. We had flooding all over the country. That's a big issue, and that's one of the things we wanted to talk about here. We also wanted to talk a little about CRP ground because we're getting lots of questions from that. Guys had CRP ground in 2009, now they're going to put it into crop production in 2010. What do you do?
Well, Brian's all worried about equipment and how do we get tractors through this and combines and planters. I'm worried about everything else that's out in that soil naturally, all that soil life that's out there. When you think about flooded ground, all right, so it wipes out a crop, and yes, that definitely hurts financially, but it also wipes out everything in that soil. So when you've got different bacteria and fungi and earthworms and all these things, when you've got ground that stays underwater for a long period of time, much of that, if not all of that, is dead. So now you have to bring some life back into that soil if you want to make it productive again.
Okay, so one of the things that you've got to look at is, for example, if you're going to raise a corn crop, you might have lots of phosphorus out in the soil. The problem is a lot of your phosphorus might not get into the plant without the presence of mycorrhiza fungi. So if you still want to raise corn on ground that was flooded last year, that might not be the best idea. You might be ahead to raise soybeans, but let's just say you insist on raising corn. Here are some things we would suggest. Number one, I'd get some manure out there that helps get more soil life going, bacteria, fungi, all those types of things. The next thing is I would add a product like Quick Roots to my seed corn. That will give you a combination of beneficial bacteria and fungi that will definitely help in those situations. And finally, I'd probably add a little bit more phosphorus. Even though you might have lots of phosphorus out there, I'd use a very good and low salt starter fertilizer when I'm planting. That should help you out as well.
You want that phosphorus to be available for your crop because you don't have all those helpers out there, all that beneficial fungi that was in the soil probably isn't there to help you. So make sure it's available and placed reasonably close to where the seed is so the roots are going to intercept.
Now, this flooded ground, let's talk about why it got flooded. In a lot of cases, we had abnormally high moisture and we had a little cooler weather, so we didn't get rid of or didn't evaporate as much water as we normally would. But here's the other factor. In a lot of the western corn belt, there is not nearly as much drainage tile as there needs to be. We've put in over 50 miles of drain tile on our farm in less than 2 years, and we've got a little more to go yet too, and that has helped us unbelievably. Even in this field we're standing in right here, very often we have to late plant 10 or 15 or even 20 acres. Now that we got the tile in last fall, this year we were able to plant straight through. The whole field yielded 215 bushels, by far the best yield we've ever had, and we didn't get stuck, and we were able to plant it all on time. So all these things you got to start looking at on your farm. If you're consistently having problems with ground flooding out, maybe you need to try to get that tiled and solve the problem once and for all.
Okay, you also threw CRP into this subject about, okay, we've got considerations of something that's a little abnormal going into next year. Well, if you've got CRP ground that's coming out and you're going to plant your first crop in there for quite a few years, there are a number of things to worry about. One of the first things that jumps out to me is there are going to be some insects out there like grubs, for example, cutworms of different types that you probably aren't used to thinking about. So you'll want to use an insecticide seed treatment like a Poncho, Cruiser, Gaucho, Innovate, whatever the case may be. You're going to want that whether you plant soybeans or corn.
Yeah, but that may
added protection.
Yes, but that may not be enough. If you have quite a few white grubs out there, and you can go out and dig a little bit and find out if you have very many white grubs. But if you have a lot of white grubs out there, I'll tell you what, there is no seed treatment that's going to give you 100% control. It's just not going to be enough. So then what do you do?
Well, then you've got to add some insecticide in there. So you have to see what's labeled depending on which crop you're going in. Like, let's take corn, for example. You could put some Force or some Aztec or some Lorsban right in the furrow to try and give some added protection around that seed. Or you could lay some on top as well as in furrow, or a T-band, that insecticide. In addition to putting in insecticidal seed treatment, that would be a good option.
Okay, here are a couple other things that I always look at with CRP ground. Number one, it's got a lot of residue out there. So if you're going to plant corn, you need lots of extra nitrogen to help start breaking that residue down. So I'd put at least 50 or 75 pounds of additional nitrogen on above and beyond what your corn crop normally needs.
The other thing with that nitrogen is you could inject it down a little bit deeper. There's still going to be a lot of root mass that needs to break down.
Yep.
So you'll still have to up your rate, maybe not as much as if you would have broadcasted on top.
Okay, another thing with CRP, I don't really like to just go out and do full tillage. We normally will try to strip till or just plant right into that CRP ground. And I know you might have some gopher holes or something like that that you may have to take care of. But I'm just saying when you do the full-scale tillage, you're going to deteriorate a lot of that organic matter that you've spent 10 or 15 or 20 years building up. And if we can hold a lot of that organic matter, that's a good thing long-term for your crop. So I don't think I'd destroy all that. Try to do as little amount of tillage as possible. The last big problem I've got with CRP is it's been perennial grasses for many years. So how are you going to do a good job controlling those?
Well, I would call that weed control, because those beneficial perennial grasses you've had out there were great during the time at CRP, but now they're going to be your biggest enemy going into crops. Also, you may have some perennial weeds that have gotten started out there as well. Go out with a strong rate of Roundup one time without tillage to try and get down into that root system and go all the way through the root system to completely kill those weeds. The other thing I'd like to do is see a Roundup ready crop planted into CRP ground.
Right.
That way in crop, you have a rescue.
But here's the problem, and it's the exact opposite of that flooded ground we talked about. The CRP ground is going to be dry. It's going to be too dry, and if you didn't kill that CRP off last fall, well, going into this spring, you've already probably lost a lot of moisture, so you've got to pray for lots of rain this year. Otherwise, you're probably going to have a short crop. That's a big consideration. We've talked about a lot of things here, flooded ground and CRP. We're discussing both of them together just because they're different situations that we run into. Rather than just normal crop ground like this, you've got to address those things appropriately. If you do, you can still have a good crop going into 2010.
Well, whether it's flooded ground or CRP, you could still have problems with weeds like our weed of the week. We'll show you how to get it under control coming up later in the show.